Alright, so it's been a while since I've covered a Star Trek episode. Again, I really am trying to work out a way to get these reviews out faster. It's just taking me some time. This is actually quite the lesson in why I should prepare for a new review series before I start one. Anyway, since it's been so long, you guys might need something of a recap of the first part of this episode. Random Star Trek, for those of you who don't know, is a series where I use the Star Trek randomizer, which I will link to in the description of this video, assuming that I remember to randomly select one of the many episodes of Star Trek that are available on Netflix, watch it, and then review it. I do try to review every part of a multi-part episode all at once, whenever I get one, but this multi-part episode was just too much for me to handle in that regard. This is part 2 of my 3-part review of a trio of episodes from Enterprise's 4th season. In the first of these 3 episodes, Babel 1, we saw a Romulan ship capable of cloaking itself to look like any other type of ship, and even give off readings of that same type of ship, going around and attacking ships belonging to various superpowers throughout the quadrant, seeking to escalate various conflicts already in existence and destabilize the entire region so that the Romulans could move in and basically sweep everything up. And of course, the titular Enterprise gets involved in this. They're already hosting a group of Tellarite delegates, and they end up rescuing the survivors of the Andorian Captain Shran's ship, the Kumari. The Tellarites and the Andorians don't get along, and eventually come to conflict, Shran's girlfriend even being wounded by phaser fire. This episode, United, manages to take all of the elements of that first episode and use them to great effect. At the end of the day, this ends up being a story about 2 men, Captain Archer and Shran himself. Their story isn't the only thing going on in this episode, but it is the bulk of the episode, so I'm going to save it for last. There are a couple of subplots going on throughout this episode as well. The principal characters are still trying to bring together a joint task force of Vulcan, Tellarite, and Andorian ships to help locate and repel this Romulan disguise ship. Their progress towards doing so being hampered by the Archer-Shran plot that I mentioned. And also, 2 of Enterprise's crew members, Chief Engineer Trip Tucker and Chief of Security Malcolm Reed, are stuck on the Romulan disguise ship, trapped in environmental suits since the ship doesn't have an atmosphere of its own. Their story actually makes up the B-plot of this episode. They manage to work their way through the ship and discover something that the audience already knows, that the ship doesn't actually have a crew, that it's remote controlled. And if you guys did watch the previous review, you'll know that I made a point of mentioning that I thought it was a mistake to reveal definitively that it was the Romulans behind this plot. It is Trip and Malcolm's plot here which sort of justifies that decision, as they do end up communicating with the Romulan captain who is remote controlling the ship, even managing to do some damage to the ship and get outside into open space to await rescue. As intriguing as the interplay between these 2 characters and the Romulan captain were, I guess the Romulan would actually technically be a commander, but that doesn't matter. As intriguing as those interactions were, wouldn't it have been even more intriguing if we still didn't know that it was the Romulans for sure? And then we hear this voice talking to them seemingly out of nowhere, and instead of getting his perspective of things, instead of knowing his motivations, we have to guess at them, just like the characters that we're watching. I understand that this was written as a multi-part episode and they needed content to justify that, but I still stand by what I said in the last review, that showing us the Romulan side of things shatters the intrigue and comes off as padding anyway, so it shouldn't have been there. Something better could have gone there, and I wish that it had, even if it meant that this multi-parter was split into fewer episodes. So that's Trip and Malcolm's story. It cuts into the episode occasionally, offering a reprieve from the A-plot, as is the purpose of a B-plot. But the A-plot here is definitely the more interesting of the 2. I mentioned that Shran's girlfriend was injured by phaser fire. She was, in fact, injured by a member of the Tellarite delegation, and it turns out she's having an adverse effect to the weapon, one which has made what would normally be a superficial wound quite dangerous. And even though there are a couple of fake-outs where it seems like they're going to be able to treat her and she's going to be okay before we finally find out that she has died from her injuries, even though that does bother me because it feels like more padding, the weight of her death is not lost on me, and I definitely feel for Shran. I mentioned in the previous review how much I like Shran as a character because he is one of the best realized characters in this show, coming off as sort of the Andorian equivalent to a Captain Kirk, a true pioneer and hero to his people. And we have gotten to know him quite well over the course of this series, and so we feel this loss along with him as if he were any member of the regular cast. And because Enterprise decided they needed to make the Andorians into an honor-based society like the Klingons, though not quite as extreme as the Klingons, thankfully, he of course demands the chance to fight the one who killed his girlfriend to the death, which would of course devastate these ongoing efforts towards peace. It wouldn't just cause the collapse of this alliance that they're trying to put together now to combat this disguise ship, it might actually lead to war. So Archer offers to stand in for the Tellarite and fight Shran. To the death, mind you. This is a death match. And Archer and Shran are friends at this point. Each of them considers the other a friend, so they go into this with the knowledge that one of them is going to have to kill their friend. And Archer goes into this with the knowledge that not only is he physically weaker than Shran, but he also sucks at fighting. That is an established fact of this series. Captain Archer is basically the Worf of this show. He sucks at fighting. He is going to lose this fight, and he's going to die. He goes into this with the knowledge that that's going to happen. And yes, he is going to try to find a way to prevent that from happening and still satisfy Shran's honor so that they can move past this. But if he does die, then that means Shran will not have killed this Tellarite, and he will have no reason to do so anymore. And therefore, peace between the two peoples might actually be achievable still. He's willing to sacrifice himself for that ideal, and honestly, I think this is probably the most heroic that Archer has ever been throughout this entire show. This, I think, is his crowning moment of awesome. And this does give a lot of the other characters stuff to do. We have Hoshi, the communications officer, and also their chief linguist, not only helping Archer to learn the rules of this conflict, but also to rules lawyer a way out of it. And helmsman Travis Mayweather, who rarely gets anything important to do in these episodes, is even the one who suggests to look for the solution that's used later. But I think probably the most interesting interactions here, aside from the interactions between Archer and Shran, are the ones between Archer and T'Pol. Enterprise's resident Vulcan is one of the most criminally underutilized characters in Star Trek history, but here they make good use of her, building a similar sort of dynamic between her and Archer, as we might have seen between Spock and Kirk in the original series. A conflict between human idealism and Vulcan pragmatism. Archer is convinced that everything is going to work out, whereas T'Pol is more pragmatic about things. Thankfully, though, Archer does find a way out of this. I almost don't want to spoil it for the same reason that I've been purposely vague about some of the interactions in this episode, because I really feel like you should watch this episode. It's really freaking good. So I guess if you don't want it spoiled, skip ahead a couple minutes, but Archer and Shran fight, and even though Archer really sucks at fighting, maybe because he has principles to live up to here, maybe because Shran doesn't really want to hurt him, Archer actually manages to overpower Shran. And rather than kill him, he just chops off one of Shran's antennae. Since one of the rules in the code of conduct for this particular form of ritual combat states that if either combatant is made completely defenseless, combat need not continue. And removing Shran's antennae was show enough that he was defenseless. And Shran's antennae will even grow back. It's a win-win for everyone, and honestly, quite a smart plan for Archer, who is not known to be the most savvy of the Star Trek captains. With that settled, they're able to track down the disguise ship, recover the missing crew members, and we even, before the episode ends, get a shot of the combined fleet warping in to confront this ship, not only preventing it from destroying Enterprise in a straight-up fight, but driving it off. The Tellarite ambassador comes to Shran, recognizing that this is the optimal time to make peace between their two peoples, and offers him his hand, and Shran actually takes it. And the camera pulls back to reveal a stunning shot of ships from all of the founding members of what will be the United Federation of Planets flying in formation with one another, implying that the actions of the Romulans actually set the groundwork for that very organization, which is pretty ironic. It's beautiful and would have been the perfect place to end this two-parter, but of course we have to cut back to the Romulans again and reveal that the person psychically controlling the disguise ship is and always has been a sort of albino Andorian who seems to be blind, obviously attempting to build intrigue for the third part of this arc, the Einar, but I kinda hate it. First of all, and spoiler alert, the Einar isn't a very good episode, and it is especially disappointing as the end of this particular story. And also, just as I think less would have been more in terms of showing us the Romulans in general, I also would have liked it better if they had driven this ship off and never been able to find it after that. The Romulans are the kind of people that when a plan fails, and mind you, this plan did fail. Multiple superpowers now know what this ship looks like and how to find it. The Romulans are the kind of people that when a plan fails, they cut their losses. It would have made sense for us never to see this ship again, or to only see it again, once the Romulans had improved upon this design and tried a second time. And I know that at this point they were still planning ahead for a next season that they never ended up getting. I really wish that they had chosen to relegate the resolution of this particular plot, that being the destruction of this ship, to that 5th season, because then, even though we never would have gotten to see it destroyed, this episode would have ended on what I think would have been a much more intriguing cliffhanger, and this storyline would have ended on a higher note overall. Overall, though, this is an excellent episode. Just like Babel 1 before it, this is one of the strongest episodes of this entire series. Now, granted, that's not saying a lot, because Enterprise was a pretty weak series overall. But I want to be clear, this isn't just a good episode by Enterprise standards. This is a good episode by Star Trek standards. I am fairly certain that I have said this before, but in case I haven't, if you're someone like me who eventually gave up on Enterprise because the plots were basically rehashes of stuff from previous series with less compelling characters, and so you never watched this 4th season of the show, I highly recommend that you go back and watch it. Except for the first episode. The first episode's garbage. Because the 4th season of Enterprise rounded out to be pretty freaking great. All of that said, though, guys, as per usual, I'd like to know, what did you think of this episode of Star Trek Enterprise? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.